Good morning. How many are familiar with Make Magazine? Great, that's actually good. How many of you have been to Maker Faire? Awesome. Well, I hope to talk a little bit about this, but kind of in this context of kids at play. I gave a talk once at the Aspen Ideas Festival. And there was a woman who was just monitoring people coming in the door. She came up afterwards and said, you know, I have a son who's just like the kind of person you're talking about. He goes off and he takes things apart. He likes to, put things together. And I always tell him, don't do that because he's destroying things. And you made me think that he's actually learning. And we happened to have a small Maker Faire in Aspen the day after the event. And I said, well, bring him by. He's pretty young. And she did. And they sat down. We had a simple activity where he was building some circuits. It happened to be that she brought her whole family, and he had an older sister, and she sat down, and she started engaging. And I went up to the woman, I said, not only look at it, your son likes to do this, but your daughter does too. And there's something in what I'm going to be talking about that we've almost stopped recognizing some of these capabilities. We sometimes go into the word tinkering in our vocabulary. We've stopped recognizing them in our culture and, more importantly, in our kids. As I'll be talking about, this is stuff that used to be in the mainstream. It used to be, that looks good, that's fine, I don't care about this later. It used to be something we were quite familiar with, but now it's out on the margins. And I in some ways, kind of rediscovered this. And when I think of things like CES, and it's really how overwhelming it is out there. I think we can have really two different attitudes. As kind of Robin said in her introduction, we can be overwhelmed by the amount of change in the pace of technology, or we can see ourselves at the center of it as drivers of that change and participants in that change. And I think one of the key things that I think applies to with all kinds of technology here is how do you get kids to drive it? How do you get them to participate in it? Not just really as even users, but as shapers and thinkers and creators. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I think of makers as agents of change. And I think they've had a profound impact historically. I think they are having an impact today in brand new ways. So Make is kind of like a reinvention of popular mechanics. I began to see that a generation that was growing up with software as their primary interest was beginning to explore hardware. And devices like your cell phone that's hardware, right? And it's a pack of sensors that do really interesting things and generate data that you can build applications with. But understanding this sort of communication between the physical world and the digital world, and that computing was not just going to be sitting at a desktop or really even sitting in front of a screen. That computing was going to integrate into our environment completely. The applications of the future would be along those lines. So here's Popular Mechanics in 1944, 50-cent price, and this was a special issue called What to Make. This is a screen from our event. We're on our 6th year with Maker Faire in the Bay Area. Last year we did large events in the Bay Area, in Detroit, and in New York. We had over 100,000 people come to the Bay Area. And I think it's the most positive, stimulating, optimistic experience you can have to see. What I basically did and my team is kind of recreate the fair, and instead of it being about pigs and pies, it's about rockets and robots, but it's about what ordinary people are doing in their basements and garages and what they care about, what their passion is. Make is about enthusiasts, and I wanted to ask, it's almost in ways, the polar opposite of CES, where CES is all the sort of business interests are quite clear and why people are doing things. What Maker Faire is about is all the personal interests. What are the passions of people? Why are they doing things? What are they doing? And I think if you haven't been there, you'd see it's amazing the diversity and complexity of some of the projects. This will.
To experiment with multiple disciplines. It also allows scientists to come into the field, it allows students to come in, it allows small children to become involved at a very easy level and approachable level to electronics, technology, and coding. It makes it more friendly. But it also allows us to explore issues of adaptive technology. And with that, we're allowed to help people that may be underserved, such as the blind, such as some other form of handicap, maybe autistic children, and help them have a better experience and integrate into society. Most people just do blink and blink, so it's like putting rhinestones on clothing that are animated. We can also begin to activate them with temperature sensors, sound sensors, motion sensors, and create environments, clothing, textiles, of which give you information in yet another manner.
I'm Richard Carter, and this is the Sashimi Tabernacle Choir.
Different.
Oh, that's awesome.
Well, basically, there were these singing fish that were popular around Christmas a number of years ago, and they were very, very annoying. And I realized that if one of them was that annoying, how annoying could you make a couple hundred? So at that point, we started building this car. It is computer controlled, orchestrated, different banks of fish sing different parts in the various songs. We've got soloists, we've got a conductor. It turned into a very complex project, but the core idea is just to make people laugh. Well, let's see, the conductor that shoots out is a lobster formerly known as Larry. I originally wanted to have a octopus doing that part, but I couldn't find anything really appropriate.
So, the funny thing about that, Richard by day is a physicist, right? And and it's just a fun thing that interacts with other people. And I know you have an old Volvo in your somewhere in your life that you can do this with. The amazing thing about Maker Faire is it being a fair, it attracted by intention families with lots of kids, and we see them running through the fair, having a great time, stimulated. But the most important thing is they get to talk to people who make things, and they get to learn from them, and have that experience of what is it like to think as a maker, and ask questions. And this last year we had Miles O'Brien from PBS NewsHour come, and he did a wonderful 10-minute segment on Maker Faire and the maker movement. And he called it "Can DIY Movement Fix a Crisis in U.S. Science Education?" I encourage you to watch it. I'm not going to show a piece of it because it's fairly involved, but I think it gets to really a core issue. There's a high priority to teach kids science and technology. I'm not sure from a government perspective or a societal perspective we always understand why. Sometimes it's justified as jobs, or future jobs will be in these areas. And kids go, I don't know. But, they're not always interested in what we want to teach them. What I found with Make is kids are interested. If you start asking kids, what do you want to make? And they see that car, they start thinking about what could they do with a bike? What could they do with some, an RC car? They begin to filter it and shape it and drive it themselves. So I think this making has a lot of power. It has had power in the past, and it has maybe new dimensions today to really engage kids in learning and playing while learning. Jean Piaget, if you know sort of psychology and childhood development, the only book he wrote on education, entitled "To Understand is to Invent." And if you think about that, You know, it's a very powerful phrase. We don't understand something by just watching TV or by being thrown a lot of content at us. Invention, what he means there, is to discover, create, make something. You know, own that whole process of asking questions. How does it work? What does it do? And to really this idea that also mentioned of constructivism, which really harkens back to Dewey and this idea of learn by doing, of building things as a way of learning. So, you know, if you think about it, if you took a young person and put them out on the floor at CES, they'd have a hard time understanding what was going on there because it's all coming at them. But just to give them the opportunity to start using the building blocks of what ends up out there, you know, is a very different experience. And I think that's a lot what we do. Speaking of building blocks, this is a thing called Open Make that we do at the Exploratorium in San Francisco. There's very little audio on this. I want you to just watch what the kids are doing, particularly with their hands and their level of engagement. Authentic learning. That, you can see it in the raw. Kids are experimenting. There's very many different forms of learning in that video. Someone that's more academic could label them and classify them and categorize them, but you know that interaction, the putting things together, trying things, is at the heart of this. And they're not being lectured. They're not being told what to think or what to do. They're exploring on their own. And I think that's where, that's what I think is at the heart of making and the opportunity here. The interesting thing when I started Make was to really think about innovation and where I knew a lot of sort of tech geeks. And then the more I got to understand what drove them, it wasn't like business. It wasn't like to make $1 million. It wasn't a lot of different motivations. It actually was the idea of play. When they saw new technology, they wanted to figure out what it was good for, what they could do with it, what they could make it do. It's a very different attitude than like teaching about technology. Like here's how to use this, like there's a right way to use it. Often they want to break it. They want to figure out what it doesn't do that they want it to do. And that's how we get innovation, by breaking things. Not by just being users and good users and following the manual. It's half the time not even reading the manual and figuring out, darn it should have done this when I type. That's what I want it to do. And so this idea of play, I think, is not just a kid thing, it's an adult thing as well. And again, I think when we think about getting this into school, it's actually creating time and the space for kids to play with technology to learn from it. One of the things I've been working on is this idea of makerspaces. Makerspace, you might have heard the term hackerspace, which is another kind of term, but I'm using makerspace as a space that's kind of indicated for kids as a learning space. So we have some affordance for that. But the other thing you saw in that video was how social this is. When we think about things in the past, like the lone tinkerer in the shed, off on his own, experimenting, today's tinkers are very social. They're on the web, they're learning from each other, but they also want to get together in person. And that's what we have in school. We have kids who are there together. They have peers. They want to watch what each of the others are doing and making and creating and learn from each other. So I'm kind of on a mission to create these kind of spaces in our schools, in our communities. And some will say, oh, that's a shop class. Well, if you have the shop class still around, please don't close it, don't throw it away, all that machinery. But it's a new kind of, it's a new way of thinking about how to use that equipment. I'm going to rush here. We have, kind of this garage band mentality is if you think about it, that's how this actually happens in our community. It often doesn't happen in schools. It happens because people get together and they start learning and they find people with similar abilities. And that's how, rock bands develop. I think that's how a lot of startups develop as well. Today, we have amateurs and pros using the same tools. This great democratization of technology. And, just about this getting together, Steve Wozniak and Jobs, they come out of this kit culture. They come out of building a personal computer. Why? Because they couldn't buy them. But this whole idea, I was willing to go and share my designs and talk about computers with my friends for free for the rest of the day, for the rest of my life. So this is a 3D printer, and you can visit the MakerBot booth and see more of that. But we have really a new wave of personalized technology that I think kids are going to be using to make things, to build things, and robotics is in there as well. And it's combining this sense of control, being able to move something, do something, which involves programming, but also involves physically making something. And lastly, of all the Maker Fair that goes on, my favorite parts are we teach kids to solder. And they're building this little pin. My battery's blowing out here, but it blinks, and it's kind of as a woman said in the video, it's getting something to blink, controlling a light. Is kind of this very first step to making things happen here. And to do that, I'm going to pass out a little thing called an LED throwy. And it's a simple project from me because I want all of you to be makers. I want all of you to learn that this is something that's possible for every one of you. You don't have to be a special type of person. You don't have to be a geek. You don't have to be anyone. All of us are makers. Cooks are makers. Carpenters are makers. All of us have to make things. And when I look at these devices, who makes these work? You do. You figure this out and make it work. So here's an LED throwy. It has a battery, an LED, a magnet, and a piece of tape. Now figure out the combinations of those things. Two of them have orientations, positive and negative, long and short. But put them together. The battery powers the LED, and the magnet will attach to the battery. And you can do one of two things with a throwy. One is you can you can actually throw it, and we have a little magnetic board here which you could use for target practice. The doors work awfully well, anything magnetic. But you could also take that, if you prefer, and use the magnet on one side of your pocket or clothing to attach it to your your dress or your shirt. So anyway, take that with you. Use it. We have about 100 of them around, but maybe as we're asking some questions, it's something you can fiddle around with. Thank you very much.